Good morning to Ambuj, our speaker from India today, who has woken up really early for us this morning to give this talk. Really appreciate it. And also good afternoon to everyone who is joining from Australia. My name is Shireen Malikpur. I am an associate professor at MSDI and director of the graduate research program. And I'll be chairing the seminar today. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which this seminar is being convened from. It is the people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respect to their elders past, present, and emerging. For those who might be new to MSDI Research Seminar Series, this is basically a forum for us where we come together every month, having a speaker either from Australia, from Monash, sometimes from MSDI, but also sometimes internationally, which is the case today, to really talk about different topics concerning sustainable development. And it's really a forum for us to exchange ideas, hear from other people's research, and learn and debate ideas, but also potentially find synergies and points where we could benefit from joining together and doing collaborations on mutual research interests. So today we are really glad to be hosting Ambuj with us. Ambuj Sagar is a professor of policy studies at Indian Institute of Technology based in Delhi in India. And he also has an executive role there where he's deputy director of strategy and planning. Before this role, Ambuj was the founding head of the School of Public Policy at the same institute. Ambuj's research is really at the intersection of science, technology, and development, with a specific focus on climate change policy, innovation policy for sustainability, energy innovation policy and strategies, as well as higher education policy. He also has a keen interest in capacity development and capacity building as a kind of theme that perhaps runs through all these other areas of policy development. Ambuj has been on several national and international expert groups, among which are the IPCC, where he was the lead author of the Working Group 3 for IPCC's 6th assessment report. He was also a colleague of mine and Cameron as part of the independent group of scientists appointed by the UN Secretary General and tasked with drafting the 2023 Global Sustainable Development Report. And he is also a member of the Science and Security Board of the Bulletin of Atomic Sciences, which, if you have heard of the Doomsday Clock, he's one of those guys who sets the hands of the Doomsday Clock. Ambuj has also been an advisor to various Indian government agencies and other multilateral and bilateral agencies. Like many of us at MSDI, Ambuj has a very interdisciplinary background. And again, like many of us at MSDI, he was originally trained as an engineer in mechanical engineering, aerospace engineering, materials engineering, and polymer science, before actually transforming to more of a social scientist and looking at issues of policy and decision-making predominantly from a social science lens. So today he's going to talk about advancing clean energy access for a truly just transition. And when I looked at the title and I saw the word truly, I knew that Ambuj was up to something here. So very keen to hear your thoughts, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Shireen. I always should keep in mind that a bio that looks relatively short on paper is much longer when it is spoken out. So I must shorten that further. But anyways, I think it's good for people to get a sense of where the speaker is coming from. And I think as you noted, and for your colleagues, I'm really an engineer who then started thinking about broader issues relating to public policy. And being from India, my interest really is in many ways thinking about issues that are important for developing countries, certainly important for India, but very often what's important for India is also important for a lot of developing countries because of the commonalities in our socio economic and cultural context with a lot of developing countries. Um, and so the work I'm going to present is really the result of interaction with a lot of colleagues over the years. And it kind of helped from time to time, some things come together in certain ways. And so I'm going to be basically talking about an issue that's near and dear to my heart, clean energy access, but also make a case as to why is it that people, more and more people should be thinking about that. It's an issue that I think does not get as much attention as it deserves. And I'm actually going to put it of the current climate global discussions and efforts to advance a clean energy transition across the world, but especially in developing countries to address the climate challenge. So that's kind of, in a sense, the bigger backdrop from which I'm going to start. Next slide, please. So for those of you who follow the climate debate, what I'm going to say is nothing new. But for those who don't follow the climate debate as much, I think the important point here to note is that while we be talking about a clean energy transition as part of our efforts, global efforts to undertake greenhouse gas mitigation, for many years, the focus really was on how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But as the focus has moved towards action, actually both in industrialized countries and developing countries, this notion of a just transition has become more prevalent. And the reason is not surprising. When people are talking about the just transition, they basically are talking about the fact that such a transition has all kinds of disruptions. And you need to think about the justice and injustice implications of those actions. As I highlighted on the screen, the notion of a just transition is not new, actually. It's not really, it precedes the climate debate. It really has its origins, the term has its origins in the US labor movement. From the 1980s, 17 and 80s, when the US started implementing all kinds of, at that time, fairly draconian environment on industry, and of course, then on its workers. And as the industry tried to meet its environmental obligations, often workers were laid off. And this question of, how do we think about justice for these workers, even as we clean up the environment, really became a kind of a issue. It took quite a bit of time for this conversation to actually enter the UNFCCC. The reality is that the UNFCCC, and that's my personal view, has really not paid full attention to issues of equity and justice. But I think certainly, as I said, as especially post-Copenhagen, post-2009, the Copenhagen COP, as the focus turned to actual implementation of the pledges that various countries had made, or started moving towards that. This issue, obviously, as you can imagine, then became prevalent because while before that it had been just much more kind of policy discussions about what targets countries should take, now it became much more a targeted implementation, and the same issues of workers' rights became much more central. And so, as I've said on the screen, the 2015 Paris Agreement, the climate COP in Paris, basically enshrined in the agreement itself this notion of a just transition, and then subsequently the Silesia Declaration at the Katowice COP also highlighted this. Next slide, please. And it's not just in the policy debate. I just did a quick search in Scopus on the term just transition. And as you can see, basically the term has really taken off even in the literature. Scholars are paying increasing attention to the just transition question. and unpacking it in many different ways. And I'm hoping that with today's talk, I'll maybe add another dimension to the discussion. Both, I think it is both kind of a scholarly side, but also kind of a practical side. Next slide, please. So I've been talking about the clean energy access. The fact is that when I'm talking about clean energy access, I'm basically talking about the fact that there are substantial numbers of people across the world who don't have access to clean energy. And the two areas that get particular attention is groups of people who don't have access to electric power. And the reason we actually focus on that, and you can see it's also one of the indicators in the SDGs under SDG 7, it's because electric power actually enables all kinds of useful energy services, and therefore is seen as a very central indicator of development. We have been making some efforts to clean this in clean energy access gap. In 2010, as the screen shows, we had about 1.2 billion people who didn't have access to electricity. The data that they have for 2020, it says 733 million. More recently, it's gone down a little bit more, about 675 million. But the important issue is that analyses show that in the absence of additional efforts and measures, even until 2030, we may have as many as 660 million people who will not have access to electric power. The second area of clean energy access that's really important is clean fuels and technology for cooking. Again, important because cooking is part of everybody's life. And currently, enormous numbers of people continue to have no access to clean cooking energy or access to only limited clean cooking energy. 2.4 billion in 2020, down to about 2.3 billion subsequently. But again, as with the previous case, its analyses show that if we don't put a particular effort on reducing these numbers, continuing under business as usual, this 2.4 billion number on the screen will reduce to only 1.9 billion by 2030. And so this is a problem. There's a kind of a global commitment to ending energy poverty by 2030, and the numbers on the screen and the projections under business as usual indicate that we are actually not going to be meeting these targets. Next slide, please. So basically, I want to just come back to the just transition issue for a second before coming back to clean energy access as to why clean energy access belongs in just transition. I think there are 2 points here that much of this global population that's not getting this clean energy access, it is responsible for very little of the global energy-related carbon emissions. And therefore, in a sense, from an equity perspective, because these people have actually not been contributing much to the greenhouse gas buildup, they have in effect given us headroom. They have given us carbon budgets that are allowing us a greater time to meet these net zero targets. So there's a kind of a one equity dimension and justice dimension. The other justice dimension is that, and I'll talk about this in a little bit more detail in a second, the lack of clean energy access adversely affects human health. It prevents availability of decent work. It impedes access to education, gender equity, and all of that. And therefore, if we are concerned about the well-being of people, we can't really talk about a clean energy transition that excludes such a large number of people. The ILO probably has the most comprehensive definition of a just transition. And one of the terms actually they use there is leave no one behind. And so really, the point I'm making is that if one is talking about a true just transition, it cannot be only about workers who are going to be disadvantaged by the transition, normally fossil fuel workers. Of course, those are important, but really one has to think about other marginalized groups that also must be part of this clean energy transition. And so therefore, I am suggesting that we cannot ignore the enormous number of people who continue to live without access to electricity or clean cooking energy if you're serious about this notion of a just energy transition. Next slide, please. I know many of you are interested in the SDGs, and I want to kind of just highlight that clean energy access actually relates to many different SDGs. We have enough research that says that electricity access can help provide livelihoods and therefore help reduce poverty because it allows all kinds of economic opportunities to emerge. Extremely important SDG 3, access to clean energy is essential to promoting health. I talked about clean cooking energy as one of the components of energy access. Well, the reason we talk about clean cooking energy is because currently in households that burn dirty fuels, whether it's biomass or kerosene and so on in households, prevalent in, as the numbers showed, a large part of the world's population, estimated 3.2 million excess deaths annually. So in fact, household air pollution is one of the largest contributors to excess mortality worldwide. So if you think about the global burden of disease, household air pollution comes up fairly high on that list. But it's not just from air pollution. Actually, as you all very well know, that healthcare facilities very often depend on electric power, and in many parts of the world, I put up some data from Africa here, that you don't really have that much availability of electric power in healthcare facilities, when then, of course, reduces the kinds of healthcare that's available to people. So obviously a link to healthcare there. It also relates to SDGs 4 and 5, quality of education and gender equality. Quality of education is pretty obvious. If you have high quality lighting at home, it allows children ability to study longer into the evening. And of course, in today's world, information technology is also becoming increasingly important for quality education. Again, even forget households, even schools in many parts of the country don't have access to electric power. But also something that I didn't list on the screen is when you're talking about, again, clean cooking energy, and we're talking about something like biomass, which is substantially present in many parts of the world, biomass-based cooking, the burden really falls on collecting biomass on women and girl children. And therefore, if you're really interested in gender equality, the gender dimensions of energy or energy access also then are important. Next slide, please. SG 13, we're now finding out that we can provide electric power access by leveraging the renewables and storage revolutions. And therefore, we are now able to provide clean energy to people without having to eliminating things like diesel sets or fossil fuel-based grid extension. And therefore, this also contributes to climate action. A recent analysis by the International Solar Alliance indicates that renewables-based mini grids are a more economically preferable solution if the grid has to be extended by more than 10 kilometers, which is the case in many parts of the world. Additionally, actually, it's not just the fact that by providing electric power, we are eliminating the use of electricity provision by things like diesel and other fossil fuels. Even the biomass used for cooking has greenhouse gas emissions. Now, that, of course, comes as a surprise to many people because people think of biomass as a renewable fuel. But biomass, if it's not burnt cleanly, has all kinds of products of incomplete combustion that are greenhouse gases. And therefore, the estimate is that, again, approximately 2% of the global greenhouse gases are from the products of incomplete combustion from biomass used for cooking. And if we can actually eliminate that and go to electric cooking, clean electric cooking, then we can also reduce these greenhouse gas emissions. And therefore, I think it's a strong case even for climate action. So in other words, clean energy access really links up to a lot of SDGs. Next slide, please. So I talked about the just energy transition, and one of the ways to advance just energy transition in developing countries has been this emergence of what are called these just energy transition partnerships, which are basically partnerships between various developing countries and a international group of donors called the International Partners Group. And this group of donors is committing to provide support to developing countries to enable their just energy transition. The first country that got this partnership was South Africa. The next two were Indonesia and Vietnam. All three of those, in their conception of the just aspect of the just energy transition, the focus was mostly on taking care of the folks whose livelihoods depended on fossil fuels. The last just energy transition partnership, which is the one with Senegal, actually is focused not on fossil fuels, because in Senegal that's not the issue, but is focused on enhancing energy supply from renewables. And so in a sense, it is about clean energy access. So even the just energy transition partnerships at least have begun to understand that clean energy access can very well be part of the just energy transition agenda. But I'm going to, in maybe the next 10 minutes or so, try to make the case that that's not enough, and we need to be doing much more. And what is it that we need to be doing? Next slide, please. So the point is that it's not just to provide clean energy access to people. We need to do more than that. Access to clean energy can directly provide some high quality energy services, lighting, cooking, space conditioning, which make our livelihoods better, but our lives better. But it also can enable the provision of other services that are important. Health, as I mentioned earlier, you can actually not only provide electric power to healthcare facilities to enable all kinds of tests, but you can also expand the kinds of technologies that are available to these people at low cost. So it will require, as I'll explain later, development of low-cost technologies, but improving health, improving livelihoods. A lot of work is that, for example, has certainly gone on in India. People are working on talking about solar-powered cold storage, food processing technologies, textile looms in villages and all of that. Creating significant economic opportunities in rural and other marginalized communities. Through agricultural pump sets, supporting food production in areas that don't have other forms of irrigation. And as I mentioned earlier, by allowing access to things like information technology and enhanced lighting, you also are improving education. So we really have to be thinking about just not providing energy access by itself, but thinking about what are the basic services that this clean energy can provide that can improve people's well-being. And therefore, I would suggest that we need to not just enable access to clean and modern energy, for which we will have to develop innovative and affordable solutions. Business as usual is not enough. But it's not just enough to enable access to clean and modern energy. We also have to be thinking about its productive uses. And when I'm using the word productive, I'm talking productive from the point of the well-being of people. And also to make sure that we can actually drive this deployment at scale to make sure that we are able to benefit as many people as possible. And this is some work I've been doing with colleagues in different parts of the world. And so the next few slides will actually talk about the work in that paper. And so maybe you can go to the next slide, please. And I'll dive right into it. I know we're running short on time. So this is a proposal that I've developed with some colleagues, which uh, postulates that we really need a global mission to enhance clean energy access in different parts of the world. And as we think about it, this mission really has two pieces. One is a focus on innovation. And for people who know me, it shouldn't surprise me because a lot of my work really does center around how to use science and technology and innovation to help address big societal challenges. And so here we know that there's not enough innovation going on uh, enhancing clean energy access and enhancing the productive uses of clean energy access. So our view is that if you're talking about emission energy access, it has to have an innovation element that builds on the innovation and performance enhancement of solar PV, wind energy, and energy storage technologies. We all know there's been really a kind of remarkable transformation in the last 10 years in all of these technologies, and the price has really come down. But still, we need further innovations to help build on these improvements to make much more possible mini grid and solar home systems. And secondly, where actually not a lot of work has happened in a systematic fashion, we need greater R&D in technologies and products that enable, as I said, more efficient and productive use of energy that are centrally focused at improving human development, improving people's well-being, and contributing to the achievement of the SDGs. This is an area in which there's not that much innovation going on, and certainly would benefit from much more efforts. Next slide, please. Just to give you an example, here is some data from the International Energy Agency about investments in startups focusing on clean energy access and clean energy. And most of it is, as you can see, focused on basically building out solar photovoltaic and equipment bundles, retail and finance solutions, but very little on clean cooking, heating, and cooling, both in the early stage and in the growth stage. So even when there are startups focusing on clean energy access, there's not that much focus on productive uses of clean energy or on the clean cooking part. Next slide. But innovation is not enough, right? It's not just enough to have commercialized models out there. One has to think about scale up, and that requires a lot of different things to come together. You have to think about how do you draw on tools from the scaling toolkit, standardization and advanced market commencement that are being used in many other areas to drive scale up, particularly so in the health area. Of course, there's a lot of focus on enhancing access to capital. But of course, for these kind of areas like clean energy access, there's not been that much capital. And one has to think about how does one enhance the availability and delivery of this kind of finance. Certainly requires fit for purpose business models, which, by the way, become much more possible when you start thinking about all these productive uses of energy that I talked about. One can think about the monetizing the health benefit, the economic opportunities, education, and all of that. And when you start putting all of that together, the business model for clean energy access becomes much more favorable. One has to think about formulating policies. Sorry, that's a typo there. Formulating policies and regulatory frameworks to support this kind of deployment. How does one develop knowledge networks that promote sharing of practices across national and regional contexts, and also synergies between different kind of actors? Next slide. And also developing capacity to develop these kind of programs locally, guide them, implement them, and coordinate the various kinds of activities that are needed for the scale up. And of course, training of the next generation of innovators and leaders who might drive this energy access efforts. particularly important in places like Africa, where there's a significant youth unemployment, but also a great amount of enthusiasm and energy among young people to engage on this kind of energy access entrepreneurship. And lastly, at the global level, there are a lot of international actors that are interested in the energy access issue. They do coordinate with each other, but we believe that we need greater coordination between the various actors and at the global level, between these actors and national governments, and between all of these actors and private entities. In other words, you really need coordinated effort between a lot of different actors internationally, domestically, public, private, in order to enable this scale up. So I think I'll just wrap up by saying that I hope I've been able to make a case that, one, if you want to have a truly just energy transition, energy access, clean energy access has to be very much a part of that agenda. And in order to really make the clean energy access transformation possible, you have to go beyond just providing the energy, but really think about what are the various ways in which may enhance people's well-being, making sure that you're putting in place activities that also allow for engagement in all those ancillary spaces, which is going to be eventually not only good for people, but also will make a better business case for enhancing this energy access. Next slide, please. That's my final slide. So that's, you might have seen that I talked about a paper that said Sagar et al. Nature Energy 2023. That's the paper. I'm just putting up the title for you. You people can take a look at it if it's interested. Just that you know, it's a kind of a very interesting collection of people. Ajay Mathur is the Director General of the International Solar Alliance. Fatih Birol, as you might know, is the head of the International Energy Agency. Jakob Mulugeta is an African colleague who teaches at UCL. Damilola Ogunbiyi is the head of Sustainable Energy for All. Yuba Sokona is another old Africa energy hand, and Akim Steiner is executive director of the UN Development Program. So it really is a set of people that came together, I guess in this case, showing an intellectual partnership to make a case for this larger mission that I just laid out to you and the rationale for that mission. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Ambuj. That was really great. Really appreciate your thoughts and also learning a bit more about the different ways of thinking about just energy transitions in this case. I am going to now open the floor for questions and comments. I see Sumit already has his hand up, so I might just go to Sumit, and then others, please feel free to also put your hand up, or if you want to put a question or comment in the chat, that's also fine. Sumit, do you want to speak directly?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Shireen, for that. Good morning, Professor Sagar. My name is Sumit. I'm a PhD student at MSGI. And thanks you for this amazing presentation. I have been following your work and have also sort of learned about the work that you have done, the great work that you've done in the field of energy. My question specifically is related to around just energy transition, and this sort of comes with the kind of background that I'm from. I'm from Jharkhand, and you might already know that Jharkhand is the coal capital or the coal hub in India. Currently, very much at the center of the entire just transition debates that are happening in India right now. Prior to relocating to Melbourne to pursue my PhD, I also happened to work with some colleagues and think tanks around just transition. And one of the things that I've experienced firsthand on the ground are the kind of inequalities, especially around the coal mining areas in these places. One thing that you very sort of very nicely touched upon was around the clean energy access. And what I always think is a kind of a dichotomy in India is the kind of debates that you have around just transition, whereas on the other hand, there are so many people who still lack, clean energy access. Because they are very much reliant on fossil fuel like coal in these areas, and I've seen a lot of people firsthand, actually picking up coal from these coal mining areas to actually, cook food for them. So my question to you is a little, I would say, a bit macro, but also touches upon on the micro aspect of it. So we have been seeing that there has been a kind of, and you also sort of talk about it, is that there has been the cost of production of energy from renewable energy sources like solar and wind has significantly gone, very low. But on the other side, we are also seeing that the production of coal, especially in emerging economies like India, is going up. And according to a statement by the chairman of Coal India, it is going to peak somewhere around 2030 or 35. So, so this entire debate of just transition, how does that fit, into the context of a country like India, where, on one hand, we are also sort of committing to meet the energy targets or the carbon emission targets that we have, but on the other hand, we are also sort of, sort of pumping up our production. And if I'm not wrong, there are several fossil fuel based power plants which are still in the pipeline, and are being sort of, constructed, and they are not being decommissioned. So that's a kind of a macro question, but again, touching upon the question of clean energy access, where you said that a lot of people, have to have, clean energy in order to truly understand just transition. So I hope I made my question clear.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Sumit. I think I'll just, that it's a very complicated question because so let me step back for a second. All of this is being driven by kind of a global conversation on mitigating climate change, right? And so the signatories to the Framework Convention are country governments. But the problem that happens is that when you go down at the subnational level, and you very well recognize that there are some states in India, and it's not just India, by the way, you see the same thing playing out, for example, even in the US. There are some states where fossil fuels are an important part of the economic landscape, right? And so politically, it becomes very difficult, even if nationally you want to talk about reducing greenhouse gas emissions. The political economy says that it becomes very difficult to move away from fossil fuels quickly in these states because, as you said rightly, a lot of livelihoods depend on that. And it's not just livelihoods of people directly. Actually, in the case of Jharkhand and other coal-producing states, even the revenue from coal is a significant part of the state exchequer, right? So, so part of the problem in India is certainly going to become how do we move away from coal? I frankly, I think it's, while India is certainly saying they're going to increase the production on coal, and it may yet happen, I think it is going to become increasingly difficult to do that because the reality is that, in fact, I think in India last year, for the first time, there was a project, a renewables project, where bundled with energy storage, the cost was lower than that of a new coal power plant. So I think it's going to become increasingly difficult to raise finance for coal power plants because from a longer term perspective, it's not going to be making sense, at least for private investors, right? And that's one thing. The second thing is that, again, since India is part of a global community of nations, it's a big emerging economy and therefore gets a significant spotlight in the global climate negotiations. It is going to have to start thinking about how to reduce its emissions or reduce the growth in its emissions in the near term. even though it's said net zero by 2070, I believe there's going to be increasing global pressure for a major country like India to move away from business as usual. That means if you do want to think about, and there are some conversations of that kind happening in India, that even if you do want to exploit fossil fuel resources, you're going to have to think about something like carbon capture and storage. That raises costs again significantly. In fact, people are talking about CCUS and CDR as a big part of the global net zero. Many of us, including me, don't believe that you can do it at the scale that's required with the economics that's going to be acceptable to people. So it's a long way of saying two things. One is it's understandable, given the local political economy, that we are hesitating to move away from coal because those are rich states, rich in terms of people, numbers, and therefore politically important. So rich from that perspective that, as a vote block, it's an important state, so you can't ignore it. And you have to be mindful of their concerns. But on the other hand, you're also going to have to think about how to balance the kind of your global obligations and the economic realities. So I think whatever the government says, I think my guess is that in the years to come, the story is going to have to change somewhat.
Thank you, Professor Sagar. Yeah.
Thanks, Ambuj. I also have a question now, speaking of coal versus also the way, at least you explained it, the debate on clean energy access. In your thinking about mission energy access, really, I was thinking about what are the political drivers, in your view, that could enhance that mission energy access? Because when I think about the reasons, the way you put it, that basically a lot of the debate on just energy transitions has very much centered around compensating or taking care of those who are really losing their livelihoods as a result of transition from fossil fuels, for example. So those who are affected by that, versus a focus on clean energy access, which, as you said, is a little bit more perhaps less advanced in the thinking of just transitions. I would say that this very much has to do with the fact that when you're talking about people who are affected by transition from fossil fuels, you're actually depriving people from things that they have already had. Whereas when you talk about clean energy access, you're talking about people who have never had energy access, and now you have to think about whether to provide them or not, and to what extent, and at what cost, etc., etc. So I think they're probably more, they're more silent on this, and there are less strong voices on this, versus those who are actually living their livelihoods already because of the transition from fossil fuels. So what would be the political drivers to access and really enhance that focus on clean energy provision, as opposed to the other side of the story?
Yeah, that's a good question. So you're absolutely right. I mean, it's kind of interesting. I said that in the climate area, I've been studying international climate policy and other dimensions of climate policy now for over 25 years. And equity and justice has never been an important consideration in that space, right? It's been brought up repeatedly and it's been ignored repeatedly. The reality is, where we're calling it a just transition, it's only the reason we are paying attention to this issue now is because there is concern that if you don't pay attention to it, it will stop the energy transition in its tracks. So it is not really a principles-based or a normative view. It is actually a very pragmatic and instrumental view, as far as I'm concerned, right? And the reality is, as you said, the difference between this group of people who are going to be disadvantaged by the move away from fossil fuels and the people who don't have energy access, the difference is that this is a very organized group. They're often unionized. And that's a very powerful actor that politicians don't want to take on. And therefore, in places like South Africa or Indonesia or Vietnam or even India, if you start moving away from coal, you get this huge pushback from organized workers, right? So you're right. I mean, I think the question you really hit the nail on the head. The question really is, how do you mobilize global actors and even actually country governments to really take seriously these questions of equity and justice, because they normally don't do that. I think my view is two things. One is to just make a case that the realities and numbers for this kind of a transition are not a clean energy access transition, are only estimated to be about 1% of the total global clean energy transition to address climate change. That's one. Second, as we invest further and further into climate mitigation, these technologies are going to become cheaper, and therefore the business case becomes more favorable. And even governments that may not care that much, or international actors that may not care that much about extending energy access, as it becomes more feasible to do so, I think they also might have to think. And the third one is, which I didn't put up, that also highlighting the cost of lack of energy access, right? So there's a study that actually says that what's the number? The lack of clean cooking energy access, if you make some economic estimates of the costs, it's about 2.4 trillion US dollars a year. Now, of course, it's an estimate by some economists. You can quibble with it, but the point is that the costs of not providing energy access are significant. And therefore, as I said, I think the case has to be made that we're not talking about energy access by itself. It's the fact that energy access enables a lot of activities that really can contribute to national development in multiple ways. And therefore, I think traditionally we've thought about that just as kind of providing an electric power connection. And now there's increasing work that's actually saying it's not just that. What makes these kind of projects sustainable is making sure that you've created an ecosystem where all of these other productive uses can actually also come in, where people in villages actually can get jobs, you can have entrepreneurs, you can actually provide better health and all of that. And then you really need different actors to then pitch in with their budgets. So health ministry, for example, that actually would like to improve the health of people, should be contributing to energy access programs, because that is probably the cheapest way of improving people's health. So I think it is going to require a little bit of creative thinking about how to make the case much more strongly, which is what we try to do in the paper. But of course, these are all heads of agencies. Our next step is to try to figure out whether we can get country governments to buy in on that. And so, trying to talk with the Indian government. One of the things we're trying to do is propose that the Indian government at least help under mission innovation, which is one of the missions created at the Paris COP, which has different pillars relating to decarbonization, maybe at least add a pillar on energy access under mission innovation. So at least get the innovation piece going and get country governments buy-in for that, and then use that as a way to expand the focus. But that's all hopeful, wishful thinking.
Thanks so much. That was a great answer. Appreciate it. Rob, please go ahead.
Thanks, and thanks, Ambuj, for a great talk. I really enjoyed listening to that. I'm sorry I was on a commute, so I couldn't see your slides. I have two questions. One is, I think you talk a lot about what maybe the literature would call distributional aspects of justice. So who gets access to energy and who doesn't? And you make a really strong case to say that they leave no one behind. Everyone should have access, and we need to have more emphasis on that. But the literature also talks about more procedural aspects of energy justice, and this is actually about access to decision making. And I didn't hear so much I think, in your talk about that aspect. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that one. So that's the first question. The second question is, I did a bit of work in India myself a long time ago, also around energy transitions, and looked at things like solar energy, and it comes in many different forms, many different socio-technical forms, from very small scale rooftop, energy, solar PV panels, to large scale utility owned systems that are grid connected, and everything in between. And they may have very different implications in terms of justices and injustices, and some of those might be replicating existing injustices. So I wonder if you can speak to that idea about looking at particular forms of innovation and their relationship to justice, whether that's also important to do that, rather than just say everyone needs access. What type of socio-technical forms then actually enable the most justice ways of doing
You're
that?
absolutely right. You're absolutely right. So let me start with the second question, actually, because it's also the easier question. But you're absolutely right. We're already seeing a lot of the focus, at least in India, we are already seeing that while a lot of the focus has been on in the renewables area, has been on large grid scale projects, because India's got these very ambitious targets to expand its renewable energy deployment. And the only way you do it is actually having large gigawatt scale projects. We're already seeing some conflicts over land acquisition and related issues. So you're absolutely right. How you implement renewable energy, not just what you use it for, but how you implement renewable energy also has justice and injustice issues. And I actually believe that this is going to become an increasingly important issue in the deployment of renewable energy across the world. We are seeing this playing out in the US already, where projects are getting stalled. In India, already there are beginning to be local protests against land acquisition. So one, I think we're going to have to be much more creative how to take care of these kind of concerns that local land users have. But to me, actually, one of the advantage of using decentralized renewables to provide energy access is really that some of these issues get mitigated significantly. Because in the end, you're putting up the project where the beneficiaries are, and people are seeing the direct benefits of this. And I think the number, let me just take a look. I think there are 21,500 mini grids in the world already, and that serve 48 million people, and their plans are about 30,000 more mini grids. So to me, actually, this is, again, something that's got some attention, but maybe not as much as it deserves, because it does address some of those concerns of making sure that there's not a chasm between the project developer and locally affected people. So here, the beneficiaries really are also people who are local. That, of course, then has issues about what's the right kind of project design. How do you work with people? And I think that also gets to your second question about the procedural part, right? So one is the kind of the higher level decision making about policies and finance and all of that, where you do want to make sure that you do get inputs from both the affected and the potential beneficiary communities to make sure that you are incorporating the right kind of elements into the program design. I think part of the problem has been that energy access has really often been top down, and people have not really been thinking about what exactly happens on the ground. There's an organization in India called CELCO that has been working with providing energy access on the ground in the last 30 years. And I think their work has been remarkably influential. Certainly it has influenced me in understanding what actually happens in a village, or what actually happens to poor people when you provide them electricity access, and how it changes their lives. And Harish has been making the point that you have to think about energy access as a developmental issue. And if you think about it as a developmental issue, then you have to think about all the range of developmental opportunities. And I think his work has really kind of started shaping, not just his work, other people in other parts of the world also, but I mean, in India, I know Harish has been fairly influential in really, based on his own work on the ground, really reconceptualizing how do we think about energy access. And it's not just provision of electrons, but it's much more than that. We have an obligation to do much more than that. And I think that really has underpinned some of the approach we've taken in the mission energy access. Having said that, I think your question of procedural justice is really important. We're not very good at actually opening up spaces for and giving voice to folks who normally are not going to be part of these processes. But I'm hoping in something like energy access, and thinking about decentralized renewables, that opens up an opportunity at least for much greater local engagement. This, by the way, I think is one of the reasons why a lot of clean cooking programs have failed, because they really have not really fully thought through about the local context and work with local people and all of that. And in fact, there was a recent study by Dan Kamen and other people that made the case that the carbon credits from clean cooking programs really are not, I think I forget the number, but he said really it's only 10% of the credits that are good, because the programs really fall flat on their face. Also, the technologies they're using are not particularly good, but the programs fall flat on the face because you eventually have not taken into account the user context, and people do all kinds of things like energy stacking and all of that. So understanding local needs, understanding the user context is really important. And the best way to do that is really actually have them to become part of the conversations. So, but again, I don't have a simple way to suggest how to really internalize that and make it a formal part of the thinking. It's a tough one.
Thanks, Ambuj. That's great. Happy to continue the conversation.
And Rob has also shared a paper from his former PhD student that actually looked at as part of the case study in India. We're right on time. So thanks everyone for joining. Thanks, Ambuj, for joining us today early in your morning for this talk. I personally really enjoyed the discussion, and we'll be in touch. We're working together. So we'll be hearing more from you, and hopefully other opportunities in the future for collaboration with the broader MSDI as well. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much. A pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.